Hello and welcome to another Cork and Taylor Wine Podcast. Luke Taylor here, and I'm in a very special place. First time ever in Chalk Hill, and it should be, it is lovely and gorgeous, even though his DirecTV fell over because of the wind. But just remember to subscribe, rate, and review. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Also, if you want to support us, we're going to do some cool bonus stuff at the end. Go to our Patreon page, www.patreon.com/Cork and Taylor. So really fun guest. It's first time we've actually met. I sell his wines in Ohio. It's Calluna. And the amazing thing is, I think you're the first person we've ever interviewed that went through a midlife crisis.
Midlife crisis? Yeah. What was that?
Well, 44 years old, you enrolled at Fresno State. Were you the oldest person in the program at the time?
You know, I don't think I was, but certainly among them. Yeah. Fresno State really does have a tradition of older people coming back and doing sort of second career things. And so I don't think I stuck out like a sore thumb, but I was one of the older people there. Yeah. And certainly I was with many people who were college kids, majoring in enology or viticulture.
Awesome.
So it was a kind of a fun experience, actually.
So we got David Jeffrey of Kaluna Vineyards in lovely Chalk Hill. In Sonoma, right? We're in Sonoma, aren't we?
Sonoma County. We are in Sonoma County. We're in the Chalk Hill appellation of Sonoma County, a relatively small growing area, but one which I think is really a good one, and we can talk about that in the context of the wines as we go forward.
Yeah. So in 2001, you're working in New York City around that time.
That's right.
In the Treasury Department at Seagram's. What made you to decide to just go back to college?
Well, and actually, it was, when I worked at Seagram, that was much earlier in my career, in the early mid-'80s, after business school. And Seagram, most people know, is sort of the large liquor company. At the time, they also had quite a good wine division, including they owned Chateau and Estates, which imported all the great Bordeaux wines and Burgundy and many other wines. But I had nothing to do with their wine division, and yet Seagram was willing to put a lot of their employees through this wine appreciation course that was taught in New York. It's something I never would have done on my own because it was kind of expensive, but a number of my colleagues had taken the course and said it was great. So I was vaguely interested in wine and said, sure, I'll try it. And it was a great course. It met once a week for about 8 or 10 weeks. And, you'd go in and you'd have 10 glasses of wine put out in front of you. And I'd never seen anything like that before back then. And like it might be the white wines of France one night or something like that. And so you got a lot of homework and I just kept going with it. I kept reading about wine. Visiting wine country. I started collecting wine pretty big time, and that back then it was a little cheaper to buy top growth Bordeaux and so forth.
Yeah, it cost you like what, $30 a bottle and stuff like
that.
$40 a bottle.
I mean, I can remember buying Leoville Las Casas 82 for about $150, which twice that a bottle these days or more. So it was much cheaper, but those wines have to last me a lifetime because they're hard to replace at this point. So that's what really got me going with wine, and then I met and married my wife, Marla, whose business sells to the wine industry. Her business sells to a number of industries, but the wine industry was becoming more important to them. And so we would talk about doing something like this, getting a property in wine country when we retired. That's how it started our talk. But then, I went through a job change and said, maybe we do this now while I'm still young enough to actually participate in this, the actual, building out of a vineyard and development of the whole, winery operation and so forth. So we did it. In 2001, we left New York just before the World Trade Towers collapsed, and I commuted through those for many years. and went to Fresno, as you said, and was there for about 3.5 years, working on the enology and viticulture degree. And then I worked in Bordeaux for a little bit after that as part of my training. And then we came up to Sonoma County thinking, maybe we'll get something small here. But I stumbled on this property and really came up to look at it just on a lark. It was 80 acres, so it was way too big for what we were looking at. But again, it's in this Chalk Hill growing area, and I liked that. So I said, I'll just come up and look at it. And it was so beautiful. I had my family come up and see it. And so we decided to go for it, and that meant writing a business plan, raising money, and making it work. So we were able to get it going.
Yeah. What were the early years like of the vineyards?
Just a lot of work, a lot of permitting work, and planning work. We were in escrow for quite a while on this property because the guy who was selling it to us needed a lot line adjustment to make it work, and it's hard to get that in Sonoma County. So we were in escrow for almost a year doing all the pre-planning to do it, but it allowed us to hit the ground running. And so it was busy initially with all the planning and the putting the vineyard together. And then, once the vineyard was in the ground, then, you have like a couple, 3 years to, you have to prune the vineyard, be careful with the vineyard, but there's not lots and lots to do in the vineyard. So that's when we decided we, try to develop out the property and built the house and everything. So that took a lot of that time. But then by year 3, we were starting to make wine. You can make really high quality wine in year 3 of a vineyard these days, provided you keep your yields really low. Because the vine can ripen fruit, but it can't ripen a lot of fruit, and it tends to want to push out more than it can ripen. So, just in 2007, we only made like 200 cases of wine, and that same area of the vineyard can make, well over 2,000 cases. So you see we had yields that were like a factor of 10 less than the vines ultimately could produce. And so our 07s were good. It was good vintage generally in California. And that just went from there. We sold out those 200 cases and said yes. And the next vintage was 1,000 cases and 1,500 cases. And the recent vintages, we've been up to near 4,000 cases. And
would you say that's your kind of comfort point? Your kind of
that's, I think, kind of the capacity of the vineyard. And I like the area we're in. I feel we've planted the best areas of the property, and after that there may be less optimal areas, but I think we're pretty happy at this size and to work on quality and not so much quantity. Right.
So you spent some time in Bordeaux, you spent some time in Napa and Sonoma. Who is your biggest influence, and what did you take back from more so in Bordeaux that you've kind of incorporated kind of in your daily,
Yeah. Well, probably my biggest influence in wine has just been the years of collecting and tasting fine wine. And I have been fortunate in that respect because I got going with it early enough where, again, fine wine was somewhat more affordable back then. And so I could really expose myself to the best wines of the world and read about them, and winemaking in general. But, Alain Reynaud at Chateau Quinault, where I worked, was certainly an inspiration for me. He was an interesting person in that he grew up in Pomerol. His family still has a chateau there, Chateau Le Quadiguet. But he left and he became a medical doctor and then yet returned to Bordeaux, but founded his own chateau in Saint-Emilion by taking over Chateau Quinault and completely upgrading the vineyards and the winery and everything. And so he was, a really interesting person to work for. I was just there for 3 months and doing a stage, as they say, but It was a perfect 3 months where I arrived for harvest. So I see harvest the crush line, alcoholic fermentation, malolactic fermentation, then barrel down. So pretty much the whole process of the important elements of winemaking. And then, I've been back, and we've been back as a family several times since then and watched other aspects of it. And so, so that was a really important thing for me to have done as part of my training and understanding. I really want to know what goes on in Bordeaux versus what goes on here, what's different.
What would you say the biggest difference is between Bordeaux and Napa or Sonoma?
Well, the winemaking is reasonably similar because there's no real secrets on that. To me, the big difference
the French would beg to differ, huh?
Well, they might, but in some senses, you could think of them as being quiet and secretive. But on the other hand, the French there's a tendency for all of them to make wine exactly the same. And that's why their argument on terroir is so important to them, because they're all making wine the same. So any difference must be what the land and the climate and the general terroir issues are showing. So they're not really, important secrets in winemaking. People do things fairly similar. But to me, the big difference that's very noticeable immediately is in the vineyard. Because if you see a vineyard in Bordeaux and true of Burgundy and many places in Europe, the vineyard is so much more densely planted. And yet the vineyard's not crowded because the vines are much smaller. So you can walk through Chateau Lynch-Bage or de Cru-Beaucaillou, and you see these what look like tree stumps almost, because that's what the vines don't get bigger as they get taller as they get older, but they get fatter, thicker in the trunk. And then each year there's just 2 canes coming out of that trunk that they're pruned down to that every year. And the vines, since they're planted on relatively less vigorous soil, and they get, I would say, less inputs of water and fertilizer, they tend not to grow very big. And so they're historically smaller. So the vineyard's much more vines, much less crowded, and so much lower yield per vine. And when Napa planted, they kind of turned this model on its head, because the French were in these low vigor areas, because generally you saved your really good soils, high vigor soils for food, and then you planted the vines where you didn't need to grow food, and they found, it actually, using these non-vigorous rocky soils were actually really good for high-quality wine grapes, if that was your goals. So they did that. When Napa planted, they selected the Napa Valley floor, which is kind of a paradise of fertility. And so you see the vineyards, the vines are much more vigorous in that situation. So the growers had to account for that by planting them much more spaced out so the vine could get bigger. And they often pruned it differently. Instead of cordon, they went to cane pruning, where the trunk of the vine is extended laterally. So you see the big thick trunk and these thick arms coming out on either side, sometimes 2 on each side for quad cordon. But so the whole idea is to space out the vigor of the vine and allow it to use its power to grow, but it's still not have it all bunched up, the fruit in particular. So in any event, the vineyards are very different in California and Bordeaux. And, the mindset's a little different. And obviously, with the weather, historically, it's been cooler on average in Bordeaux, so that your fruit profile is much one of somewhat leaner, lower sugars, higher acids. And so things you do tend to, function around there. That's why historically, Bordeaux and other places in France, you get to chaptalize. If your sugars are not high enough, you can add sugar. And they don't see that as a manipulation at all.
I know some places in Napa that do that.
Well, yeah, but usually it's a different problem in Napa. Usually they have plenty of sugar, and so their problem is too much sugar and not enough acid. So there tend to be more adding tartaric acid for the balance that way. Yeah, adding sugar in Napa, that would be a lot because usually that's something you're fighting. But, you could have years like 2011 or conceivably 2010 where people might say, sugars are low this year.
Yeah. So what I want to know is, do you like your French fries with ketchup or mayonnaise? And it's a loaded question, as you might not know.
Ketchup, but if you call it aioli and not mayonnaise,
Yes.
then I might opt for that.
Yes. They do like mayonnaise over in France, believe it or not.
Yeah.
So what was the first wine? The first one we had was the Kaluna Vineyards Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon.
Yeah, that's right.
So the CVC Blanc.
Well, not so much CVC.
just
We call
messing
it Kaluna Estate Blanc. That's
Okay.
playing the fact that Sauvignon Blanc is the main grape here. And this is the one white wine we make. It is made very much in the tradition of the dry white wines of
It's delicious.
Bordeaux. And white Bordeaux is not a super well-known wine, but it's a really good one. It's a blend of Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon, as is this. And I make this in the traditional way, whereby I barrel ferment it and barrel age it for about 6 months before I bottle it. But there's very little new oak used here because I want the purity of the fruit to come through and not have an overlay of vanilla and oak, which, can work okay with Chardonnay. I tend not to like it for these varietals.
Right. Do they make Chardonnay in Bordeaux?
No.
Exactly.
Not officially.
So why did you pick the wines that you make when you started out? I think you said it's your 15th harvest. I think you said. What made you kind of go to planting Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, Merlot, Malbec, the traditional kind of Bordeaux varietals?
Well, a couple things. One is I do feel that the Bordeaux varietals can do very well in California. You can make wines from them that can be on the table with the greatest wines of the world. I tend to like the more traditional style of some of the historical ones, like the old Mayacamas, Heights, Ridge, Montebello. The Stag's Leap back when they won their prize. Yeah, the traditional balance in wine, and so that to me was what made me decide I wanted to work with the Bordeaux varietals. If I were going to work with Pinot Noir, which is also a love, I probably would have wanted to be in Oregon, and my wife can't be there; she needs to be here.
Right.
So this was it, and the one wine I've collected the most of over time is Bordeaux. So I love that wine and know it pretty well.
Well, it's funny you say about Pinot. I had Aaron Pott on the podcast, and he said every winemaker has like a Pinot Noir fascination.
Well, it's certainly one of the great grapes of the world. It can be very finicky grape, one that expresses itself very differently.
Sounds like one of my kids. Finicky and expresses itself.
Yeah. Well, like the Pinot Noir they make around here in the Russian River is just so dramatically different than red Burgundy, for example, that it's almost like a different species. And so you can do a lot of things. So I'm sure winemakers can get fascinated with other than making some Pinot Noir as a home winemaker in New Jersey, I got some Edna Valley fruit at some point and made it in a food-grade garbage can, and it actually was pretty good. But I'm not an expert on Pinot Noir other than drinking red Burgundy from time to time.
You couldn't taste the tannins from the wood. You tasted the tannins from the plastic.
Yeah.
So that's really good. Let's try red.
Okay, sure.
Red. Let's go to red. What do you want to get me at the CVC?
Well, let's do the CVC.
Not to twist your arm.
No, here. Can you go ahead and pour that while I clear my glass?
So this is would you say this is kind of the workhorse for you?
Yeah, definitely. Workhorse or standard bearer is another term I use because it is our largest production wine. It's a Bordeaux blend leading with Merlot. And
The nasty 6-letter word, Merlot.
yeah, and then it has the other 4 red varietals we grow here on the property: the Cabernet Sauvignon, Cab Franc, and some Petit Verdot and Malbec.
Does it change every year, the kind of the varietal breakdown?
Yeah, a little bit, but it's still, in that genre. It kind of goes up and down. It's all subject to blending trials and putting it all together.
Are you more of a left bank guy or a right bank guy?
I like them both, I have to say.
It's funny you say that because I would agree with you. I mean, I'm just being honest. I mean, some people say, well, I don't like Merlot. Well, do you realize left bank is Merlot?
Right bank.
Or right bank, sorry.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's why they don't like it.
Well,
My
I
bad.
know. I mean, I often joke that, somebody says they don't like Merlot because I make a Merlot a single vineyard Merlot, and we'll try that next. But if they say they don't like Merlot, I'll say, oh, that's too bad, because this evening I was going to open a bottle of Chateau Petrus, but if you don't like Merlot, I guess we won't do that.
And Merlot doesn't age either, supposedly.
Yeah, you're right.
Which is comical in itself.
Right, exactly. No. Merlot is one of the great grapes of the world, and in fact, it's not that easy to distinguish a right bank wine from a left bank wine. I mean, yes, one can, but they're very similar, in their qualities. And so to say you don't like Merlot is a bit of a stretch, but, the sideways and people's perception are about some of the lower quality Merlots that this country produced.
But that's the problem, right?
Yeah. And it's kind of tainted everything. But I think, things seem to be coming back in that regard. And anyway, the audience that we make wine for is pretty sophisticated, I think, and knows the story on Merlot. Mm-hmm. And this wine in particular, it will drink. There's more, if you add up the Cab Franc and Cab Sauvignon, I think there's more of that in the here than Merlot. So it drinks very much like a Cabernet too.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question from a winemaker's perspective. Why would you throw in like a 6 or 5% Petit Verdot or 2% Malbec?
Yeah. Well, it's remarkable how much difference small percents can make in a blend. And if you sit through blending trials, you really see this. Even 1% can make a difference. And it's not always easy to predict. Because what changes the wine matrix, changes with how that Petit Verdot tastes to you on its own versus how it tastes when it gets into the blend and how it nudges the blend can be, pretty different and can make a pretty big statement. So you do have to be careful about the blend and make sure it works.
Why'd you change the damn packaging?
Well, it used to be the cuvee used to be a grayscale, and I always thought very classy, but there are several people
I love purple.
that told me that, it looks kind of dark on a shelf, it doesn't pop. So we moved took off the grayscale on the background and made it more white, off-white, like the rest of our labels, and then the heather plant that graces all our labels is now a deep purple and a really pretty shade of purple, I think. So it looks good.
Yeah, it looks great. This is delicious.
Oh, good. Yeah, well, this is what I really try to accomplish with all my red wines. I like to say that, I want it to be fully ripe, but not over the top ripe into the big jammy elements. And if you smell this, I don't think you smell anything herbaceous, vegetal, underripe. It is fully ripe, but it's not just sweet fruit. There's savory elements in here. There's natural acidity. There's moderate alcohol. And you put all those things together and you get what I call traditional balance in wine. And when you have that, the wine works really well with food. And it also gives it the ability to age nicely too. When all those elements
how long do you think this could age for?
Well, I have critics that put my wines out 40 years, and I don't know if we'll be around to affirm that that's true, but they'll certainly develop well, and they all are doing well. We started making wine in 2007, and a couple of years ago, we did a retrospective tasting in New York where we pulled out all the wines back to 2007, and it was great for me too, because I hadn't tasted them in that context, and none of them are showing tired. They're showing some nice development and nuances, but they're all hanging in there really well. And I think, with my style well, first of all, let's take a step back and just say these varietals, Cabernet, Merlot, Cab Franc, have proven they have the ability to live a long time in Bordeaux and many examples in California too. And the other thing that's important is the chemistry on my wines, I think, is good in that the pH is very low. It means acidity reasonably high. Alcohol is moderate, good phenolic content, the anthocyanins and tannins that act as antioxidants as the wine is slowly aging. And so I think one would expect that they would age pretty well, and they seem to be doing that.
Yeah, excellent. So what's after this one?
So, are you game to try the Merlot?
Yeah, let's do it.
No, let me just quickly.
You're coming off the. You want this or no? Or
can I Corvin it really quickly?
yeah, you go right ahead.
Yeah, I can do that, and I'll just get ahead of the game here a little bit too.
We can tell people this podcast is brought to you by nobody because nobody cares. Thanks for your support.
Well,
I love that sound. Isn't it amazing, the Corvin? We're going to give a little free advertising of the Corvin. It's amazing how it's such a small needle and wine comes out of it. I mean, like, who would have thunk that they would have done something like this, huh?
Yeah, no, I know. It's
beautiful. Thank you, sir.
Very nice, nice gadget. And
the damn cartridges, though. But you've got a nice. I'm going to ask you about that later. The whole contraption, how you did this off the air. But
sure.
Well, let me ask you this while we're about to try this. What are some of your favorite Bordeaux wines? I love Bordeaux. Absolutely love it. What are some of your favorites?
Well, maybe one of the very first wines that I had that I fell in love with was Chateau Pichon Lalande. And I remember very young in my wine drinking understanding and career, I had a bottle of 79 and then right after that, the 70. And 79 was not a great year in Bordeaux, but it was certainly very good and just a beautiful, beautiful wine. The 70 of that was incredible in that you didn't even have to drink it. I mean, you could just sit there and smell it, and it was just the most beautifully aromatic wine. And so Pichon Lalande's historically been a favorite. There are a number of small ones on the right bank that I kind of like a lot, like Chateau Corbin. Chateau Haute Ségout is another nice one that just, small and not terribly expensive wine. And I'll take the first grows anytime anybody's opening them. La Tour, Mouton, Lafite. And I actually, as I say earlier, I have some of those wines from having them earlier. And,
so why are we drinking those? We should be drinking them. Just kidding. This is delicious.
So this is Merlot au Reynaud. And au Reynaud essentially means dedicated to the Reynaud family, the folks I worked for in Bordeaux and Saint-Emilion. And so they were great to me. I lived at the chateau and had all my meals with the family and the other workers there. So I wanted to dedicate a wine to them. I chose what I felt is our best Merlot vineyard. And I used a little bit of our own Cabernet Franc in this too, like 12%, I think, in this year. And so, it's a wine of great elegance, I think, an overused term, but I think it works here. And Merlot should be a wine of a somewhat less deep color than Cabernet Sauvignon and somewhat lighter in body than Cabernet Sauvignon because it is a thinner skinned grape, and yet it should have that really nice explosiveness on the palate.
When you were first producing this, stylistically, were you trying to replicate another maybe winery or maybe Dr. Renaud, his stylistically, or is it just kind of like your play on something?
Yeah, it's not so much that. But this was to be a wine that's not only a tribute to them, but made certainly in the style of a right bank wine, a Saint-Emilion wine. And it's interesting that like the Kaluna Vineyards Cuvée, the first red we had, people say, oh, is that your right bank wine? And I say, well, it's not really a right bank because, it has a fair amount of Cabernet Sauvignon, Petit Verdot, and Malbec, and you don't see much of that on the right bank. And yet, where I worked at Chateau Quino, we did have those varietals, and it did go into the Chateau Quino back then. I don't know if they still do, but so the Kaluna Vineyards Cuvée is a little bit in that style, but it's not really meant to mimic that. It's almost like a coincidence. I view it as, I planted the 5 Bordeaux varietals, and the Cuvée is just kind of a statement of, what this property can do.
Yeah.
And whereas what we'll finish with the Kaluna Estate is really our flagship wine, and that is really a little bit modeled more in like a left bank wine and the wines of this country that I admire, like a rich Montebello or a Dominus, where they're using either all 5 or a subset of the 5 Bordeaux varietals.
So where's the Zinfandel?
Well, I don't make Zinfandel.
It's like I told Robert Bialy, I'm going to find the Cabernet vineyard in your thing. He's like, good luck. I said, I'm going to come at 2:30 in the morning. I know there's Zin planted here. Does Zin grow well in Chalk Hill or no?
I'm not sure of anybody who has it. They might. There's a chance Chalk Hill Winery does, but I'm not aware of it. To me, I think it might do pretty well. My problem with Zin is it tends to be made in such a large-scale format these days, and I would like to see a more balanced presentation of it. Like I think Chateau Montelena used to make a Zinfandel. Maybe
they still do. Yeah, they still do.
That's not, we're getting a lot that are like 16% alcohol that have some residual sugar in them that are just really massive port-like wines. And that's fine. A lot of people like that style, and a lot of them get really good ratings. But, I'd be interested to see how Zinfandel would do in a relatively cooler climate. But that's not really my calling,
I'll plant some tonight for you.
Yeah.
Pick a site.
So let's see what else we should do here.
Before I forget, David, how much Merlot do you make, the Orinals?
Of this
winery,
I just make about 175, 200 cases. This tends to be a wine club selection, but every once in a while some gets out in distribution. All right, so let me try you on another. You want to try another one of the real limited wines that are...
Sure, have at it. That's nice. Nice mouthfeel, nice acidity. It just sits in the mouth, that Merlot. The first time I ever used the Corvin, I kept just blowing canisters, and their canisters are like $10 a pop.
Yeah.
I don't know what the hell it is, so I kept looking at YouTube, trying to figure it out, but I think I figured it out. So, how long can they usually last with Corvin? A couple weeks?
I think it greatly varies depending on the type of wine. Of course, a young wine, like my wines, I pour on Corvin because my tasting schedule is very up and down, and the Corvin will really keep them in pristine shape. If I have an older wine, like particularly a Burgundy, which is Pinot Noir, more delicate wine, I would say I want to be drinking that within the first week, because I do think there is some deterioration. It's a really good wine preservation system, but I don't think it's quite as good as the company sometimes likes to say. Like they try to say, oh, you can pull off the shelf this, old Burgundy, say, and try it on the Corvin and say, no, it needs a couple more years, and put it back on the shelf. I don't buy that.
Awesome. Thank you.
So this next wine, again, another limited production wine we have called the Colonel's Vineyard Cabernet. So the Colonel's Vineyard was this vineyard at the top of our property here that we were standing over earlier. It's an 1.25 acre parcel of a really beautiful producing Cabernet Sauvignon, clone 337. And it's been such a nice producer that we decided to just bottle some of it on its own. We make a couple hundred cases of this one too. So it's an 18, it's young, we just recently released it, but you'll see, I think, the power of the Cabernet here.
It smells powerful. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? You can just smell. You can just feel it on the nose, like the power.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that beautiful? And you get power, and yet, let me check the alcohol on that, because
it says 19.6.
13.7. And so that's pretty remarkable. And not that, I have a bugaboo about alcohol, but I tend not to like the things that higher alcohol come with. Like if you get 15% alcohol, you're often getting, more of a, pruning or porty type of wine.
That's gorgeous.
Yeah, thank you.
That's about my 26th drink today, so everything tastes good. No, I'm just kidding. That's really good.
Good.
Wow.
I'm glad to hear it.
You can just feel it in your mouth. Like it's just,
Yeah, it lingers. So after this, we're going to move to Kaluna Estate.
All right, let me just stop pushing me. I'm enjoying this one now.
All right.
I'm enjoying this one, David.
That's good.
So you were at least once, top 100 wineries in wine and spirits.
Yes.
How much did that advertisement cost you? Oh no, sorry, that's Wine and Spirits. I'm not Wine Spectator. My bad. How much were you surprised, and how much did it do for your brand?
Well, all these ratings, and we have had really good ratings in the last 5 to 7 years. I can roll them out here, but they're on our website under press if anybody wants to see them. And they are very helpful, but I don't think they get your telephone ringing off the hook, just to do it. What happens is I get more people contacting me saying they're coming out to the area. They read about me and Calluna, would like to taste the wines. And so it does, over time, greatly help for sure. And because I think everybody has very mixed feelings about ratings and the critics and how they handle things. Because, I can certainly disagree with a lot of critical ratings of wines that I buy and drink and go, oh, how did the critic give this one 98 points, But I will say if I get a good rating from a critic, I always agree with it.
Yeah. And they get a nice fruit basket and a great Christmas card. As long as they don't give you the kiss of death, the 89.
Yeah.
That's like the worst rating ever, the 89, the kiss of death. How many times were you top 100 wines and wine and spirits? A couple times, right?
No, I was only that one time. And
Okay.
that's kind of a point of frustration for me because, I feel my wines have been very consistent since then. I've got other reviews saying that, and yet, it hasn't been, they move on to do other wines. And we haven't had them review our wines every year, but we have a couple times and gotten good, but not, great reviews like we did those couple of years, which made them name us that. But, we've got other reviews that match that for sure.
So tell me the process of getting your wine reviewed. How do you there's so many wineries out there. There's so many wines.
Right.
What do you do? Do you just submit? How do you?
Yeah, all the critics have a process to submit wine to them. No, I guess maybe the best known top producers have Robert Parker, or whomever is the current equivalent, call them. But most people submit wines to the critics with the process that the critics ask for. And at the time of year, that they're asking for the particular varietals. And so you just, kind of do that. And believe me, I don't submit every year. It's been a while since we've submitted to the Wine Spectator, and yet, we've had historically some really good reviews there. So I just saying to my marketing guy, let's submit wines this year to the Wine Spectator, because it's something, you got to stay on top of. And with everything going on, I can let go by, a submission to any given critic.
Mm-hmm. Who's your favorite critic? I'll put you on the spot now.
Well, I must say,
Who do you agree with most?
Well, let me answer it this way, that I've very much enjoyed over the years reading Robert Parker. I was probably his original subscriber because I started collecting wines in around 1984, and that's 83, 84. That's when he was just coming on the scene because he was declaring the 82 vintage in Bordeaux to be the vintage of the century, and lots of the British critics were disagreeing with him, and most people now agree he was right about that. And so I've got a cellar full of wines that he's recommended over the years, but I do feel, I'm sure he disagrees with this, that, in the last 15 or so years of his career, he started liking the bigger, jammier wines. And so, that's when I somewhat parted ways with him. And
so you canceled your subscription?
No, I never did that. But he's sort of gone now, and I think I maybe have canceled that subscription, or I get it one way or another. But but yeah, I mean, one of my absolute favorite critics is John Gilman, who writes View from the Cellar, and he's. I like him because he gives me great reviews, but the reality is I've read his stuff and liked him long before he reviewed my wines. He's got a very, very much more traditional palate, and loves the great wines of the world, and does great send-ups of some of the more modern wines of the world that he's not as fond of. But I've gotten great reviews from him, and I've enjoyed, the other material he writes. So that's certainly a favorite.
Right.
But, the critics are kind of fun. Like, I used to read Clive Coates when he was around, particularly on Burgundy, and their way of reviewing wines was so different than, like, when you read a review by Parker, it would jump off the page, with this purple prose about this hedonistic wine, voluptuous, these big words he would use. Whereas Clive Coates would review a Burgundy saying he'd have sort of 3 ratings. So it's like fine, and very fine indeed. And so that's how you had to hone in on that.
VFI. That's funny. Well, I always love in the ratings, it's like they have one line description, they give it a 95. But then they give someone else a 90, and they have like a 4-page soliloquy about how great the wine was.
Yeah,
I'm like, you gave a 1-liner for a 95, but you gave like 8 lines for a 90. It's like, it's just, it's a little bit inconsistent in my eyes. But all right, let's try one more, and then we'll do a little bonus stuff.
Okay, so we're gonna try we're gonna move to Kaluna Estate now. This is the 2014. So Kaluna Estate is our flagship wine.
Okay.
It's a Cabernet-driven blend made, as I say, in the tradition of the left bank, and also in, for those Cabernet-based wines in this country that I admire. And
2014.
Yeah,
nice.
and so what's also very important about this wine, it is a selection of the best fruit on our property for each year. And so now you're trying a wine that's over 7 years old, and you're going to see some of that nuances that age can do for our wines. It's still youthful, yet you do have that secondary development in the nose, where you're getting a little bit of, there's like kind of a spice tone, and then that little bit of a tobacco, mushroomy cigar box thing that Bordeaux varietals can do. But to me, the big difference versus, say, that 18 cab that we just had is now the finish is much smoother, longer,
a little
more
bit softer.
Complex. Yes, softer.
Yeah. I'll have to tell you, that Colonial's Vineyards. Ooh. VFI, very fine indeed.
Thank you.
They're all very good, but that Colonial that's going to stick.
Colonel's Vineyard.
I'm Canadian. It's
That's
Colonial.
okay.
There's no R in it. That's amazing with Colonel. It there's no R, right? I don't get it.
Believe me, I know.
I'm
not
not
sure
the
where
L
that
is
word
soft.
came from. Yeah.
That's nice. This is pretty, though. All right, David. we're going to do some bonus, all right?
All right.
I appreciate you joining us on the Cork and Taylor Wine Podcast. David, the wines were excellent. The stories were fantastic. We had some laughs. And just remember to subscribe, rate, and review. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook. Also, if you want to support us, I need to get back to Akron, Ohio somehow, so I need money for gas. So join our Patreon page, www.patreon.com/Cork and Taylor. And thanks much again, and we'll see you next week on the Cork and Taylor Wine Podcast.